From the description of Nuruddin, we come to know that Heathcliff was a founder. And Mr. Earnshaw, many years ago, went to Liverpool, and there he found this boy, Heathcliff. So he brought the boy to his family, and the boy started living in the household of Mr. Earnshaw as a member of the family. One very important interpretation that you have to know behind the finding of Heathcliff as a founder. Actually, this text of Wuthering Heights sits against the background of 18th century and 19th century England. As you know from history, 18th century, especially the second half of 18th century and the first half of 19th century, were very much remarkable for the dramatic expansion of industrialization. Industrialization of commercialization was very rapid. So people, especially farmers, left their land, came to the city, and became day laborers in mills and factories. And there was exploitation on the part of the capitalists. There was exploitation. That is, these laborers had to work 16 hours daily, but they were not paid sufficiently or justifiably. As a result, there was poverty. There was also malnutrition. And the people could not earn enough to support their family. And child labor was also at its height, that is climax. As you know, that child labor is very lucrative to the capitalists because they think children can be exploited. Much labor can be extracted from them in exchange of very little amount of money. So there was social discrimination, economic discrimination, and many parents could not maintain their families well, and they left their children. If we go far back to William Blake, and if you recite his famous poem, Chimney Sweeper, from Songs of Experience, you will know that because of poverty, many parents used to sell their children as chimney sweepers. So just think of the scorching poverty. And there was also famine. Though industrialization was rising, poverty was also rising. Exploitation was rising. Famine, malnutrition, illiteracy was also rising. And that's why a foundling like Heathcliff was a very common incident, a very common phenomenon. So I do ask you to relate this incident to the history, the incident of Heathcliff as a foundling. You have to relate it to the history. Then I think you can understand the context, and you may have, or you may be able to read this text from historicist perspective. So from the first chapter, we also come to know some Gothic incidents. For example, Heathcliff's strange behavior and his attachment to the ghost of Catherine, little Cathy's mother. And another important incident we also know from reading this chapter, that Heathcliff was treated very well by Mr. Earnshaw. But after the death of Mr. Earnshaw, he was not treated well by Hindley, the new master of the household. Hindley was the son of Mr. Earnshaw and Catherine's elder brother. So whenever he found chances, he used to torture Heathcliff. So Heathcliff grew up in extreme negligence, in extreme inhuman environment. So that very inhuman environment or inhuman treatment on the part of Hindley made Heathcliff vindictive. Heathcliff also loved Catherine. Catherine also loved Heathcliff. And we find that in childhood, Catherine and Heathcliff grew together. Sometimes on many occasions, these two persons used to go to the heath. They wandered here and there. They also ran after birds. They enjoyed themselves in the open air. But while Catherine was in her maturity, and while Catherine was to decide to marry, she had two options. One was Edgar Linton, who was the landlord of Truscross Grange, and the other person was Heathcliff, the foundling whom Catherine's father brought from Liverpool to Wuthering Heights. So Heathcliff was illiterate. He was penniless. He was living in the household of Mr. Earnshaw as an absolute dependent on this family. And on the other hand, Edgar Linton was the landlord. He belonged to sophisticated family. So we find here a contrast between Heathcliff and Edgar Linton. Edgar Linton belonged to sophisticated family or aristocratic family. And on the other hand, we find Heathcliff a penniless person, 100% dependent on Mr. Earnshaw's family. Anyway, Catherine did not make any mistake. She was very much conscious of her status. She was very, very conscious of her economic status, social status. And that's why one day she told Nellie Dean that she loved Heathcliff, no doubt, but she was going to marry Edgar Linton. She was not going to marry Heathcliff. And unfortunately, Heathcliff overheard this, and his heart broke. He was shocked. He was shocked at this unexpected discovery. He could not believe his ears that Catherine was going to marry Edgar Linton. So Heathcliff disappeared. Dramatically, he disappeared. He disappeared for several years. And by this time, Catherine married Edgar Linton and she went to Truscross Grange. And Nellie Dean also accompanied Catherine. She also started living with Catherine in Truscross Grange. So Catherine was initially happy. But unfortunately, after several years, Heathcliff came back as a changed man. He was totally different in appearance, in attitude. In appearance, he looked like a solvent, polished gentleman. He appeared to be a literate person. So this change can be interpreted metaphorically. You can interpret this change metaphorically. Okay. We find this change metaphorically. Because at that time, England was also changing metaphorically. It was changing. And there was a sudden change because of the development or spread or expansion of capitalism or industrialization. So the rapid or dramatic change that we find associated with the expansion of industrialization at that time may be metaphorically interpreted with the dramatic change of Heathcliff. So Heathcliff came back as a changed man, but as not only as a changed man, but also as a cruel man. He's vindictive, and he has determined to take revenge upon Catherine, upon Hitler also, but it's Catherine's brother. Then what happened? He used to visit Catherine in Catherine's husband's house frequently. That created uneasiness in the family of Catherine. Catherine was ambivalent. She was in ambivalent situation. She loved Heathcliff, and she loved her husband, Edgar Linton, too. Yes. Okay, sorry. So Heathcliff frequently visited Catherine, and Catherine was in an ambivalent situation. In such a very crucial episode of her life, Catherine actually lost her balance. But by that time, she gave birth to a daughter. The name of the daughter is Cathy. And Edgar Linton had a sister. The name of the sister was Isabel or Isabella. And Heathcliff fell in love with Isabella, and one day Isabella eloped and married Heathcliff. It was against the family. It was against her brother, Edgar Linton. It was also against Catherine. Catherine, Edgar Linton did not want that she should marry Heathcliff because they knew very well about Heathcliff's personality. But she cannot, or she did not pay heed to them. She fled and married Heathcliff. Isabel gave birth to a son. The name of the son was Linton Heathcliff. and she died. She died because of the torture, because of mental torture and physical torture of Heathcliff. Heathcliff was not a lover. He was very brutal in his treatment towards Isabel. So Isabel died. And Heathcliff had a very malevolent plan. On the other hand, Catherine, while she was in a juncture between Heathcliff and Edgar Linton, actually she could not maintain a balance between these two. She loved Heathcliff, but unfortunately, she had nothing to do now because she is now the wife of Mr. Edgar Linton. And she was also conscious of her social status, social duties, and responsibilities. So she could not respond to Heathcliff's intention. Anyway, while she was in such a critical juncture, she fell ill, and after recklessly struggling for survival, she also died. That is, Catherine died. But Heathcliff did not stop. He had a plan. His plan was that one day, while little Cathy, that is Catherine's daughter, came to Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff locked her and forced her to marry his ailing son, Linton Heathcliff. Linton Heathcliff was suffering from tuberculosis, and he was a little boy, but he was an evil like his father. And while he was seriously ill and needed a physician, Heathcliff did not spend even a single penny for the treatment or for the medical support for this boy. So Linton Heathcliff also died. And another important incident happened in the family. Hindley, who was the master of the house of Wuthering Heights, lost his wife. His wife was Frances, and she died during the childbirth. So Hindley had a boy, a son. The name of his son was Hareton. So Hareton survived, but Frances died. And after the death of Frances, Hindley was greatly shocked and he lost his interest in life. He developed addiction to wine. And Heathcliff used to supply him with more and more wine because he wanted that he should die soon. Anyway, Hindley also died in course of time. And Hareton, who was the inheritor of this house, was transformed into a servant. He was the true inheritor, but unfortunately, he was made a servant in the household, Hareton. And little Cathy, who married Linton Heathcliff, after the death of Linton Heathcliff, she became a young widow. Cathy loved Hareton. Hareton also loved Catherine. They were cousins too. But Heathcliff was very strict. He was strange. He was exercising his power upon these boy and girl. And in course of time, Edgar Linton also died. He died of a disease. And after the death of Edgar Linton, Heathcliff became the master of two different estates. One is Wuthering Heights and the other is Thrushcross Grange. So just think of the journey of Heathcliff's life. He was a foundling. He had nothing. He was penniless. But in course of time, he became the master of two different estates. He became the landlord of two different estates. And think of his behavior. He was quite inhuman. He was a brute. Once Isabel described Heathcliff to Cathy that Heathcliff was not a man. He was a brute. He was a beast. So Heathcliff, in this way, exercised his domination upon the members of the household of both places, that is, Wuthering Heights and Truscross Grange. So anyway, at the end, we find that Heathcliff grew quite strange behaviors or diseases. Heathcliff developed some queer or strange behavioral changes. For example, at the dead of night, he used to see the ghost of Catherine. He found that Catherine's ghost was just behind the window, and Catherine's ghost stretched out its hand into the room of Heathcliff, and the ghost also developed an intimate relationship with Heathcliff. Heathcliff also felt that there was Catherine's ghost in the household of Wuthering Heights. And that was also felt by Mr. Lockwood, the tenant, that you will find in the beginning chapter, that Mr. Lockwood passed a night in the cellar of Heathcliff's household. But at the dead of night, Lockwood started shouting for help. So why was he shouting? He was shouting because he was dreaming a strange dream. The dream was that there was a little girl just beyond the window. She penetrated her hand into the room. She caught hold of the hand of Mr. Lockwood, and she was crying, "Let me in, let me in." And Mr. Lockwood, in his dream, was recklessly trying to get his hand free from the grasp of that very girl, actually ghostly girl. So he was wrestling recklessly with that little girl. He was trying to get his hand free. And suddenly he woke up and he found that his hand was bleeding. So though it was a dream, it had some connections with reality because his hand was bleeding. He received some wounds at his hand. So he was panicked. He shouted for help. Consequently, the members of the household came to help him. Milladine also came. The other servants came. Even Heathcliff came. And Heathcliff, while knew this very incident, he thought that it was Catherine who came. And he was also furious at his people who let Mr. Lockwood live in this specific chamber or room, because it was Heathcliff's belief that Catherine's ghost usually visit this room. So he was angry with the inmates of the house, and he shouted, "Catherine, Catherine, come." So it is also a strange behavior of Heathcliff. A sane person cannot call a ghost to come and be united with him. A sane person, a mentally and physically sane person, can never summon a ghost, can never express his intention to be united with a ghost. Ghost of a person who died many years ago. It cannot happen with a sane, sound person. But we find all these strange things with Heathcliff. It was really a strange change in the personality of Heathcliff. So Heathcliff was not a normal person. It was quite abnormal. This abnormality of Heathcliff creates a Gothic environment in this very text. And that's why many critics call this text a Gothic fiction, because they find some Gothic elements in this text. So ultimately, I am towards the end of my portrayal of Heathcliff's character, or the description of the storyline of this very text. At the end, we find that Heathcliff was discovered dead in his household, in his room. That is, one morning, while the inmates of the house went to see whether Heathcliff was in his room or not, or whether he left his room in the morning or not, they found that the room was locked from inside. So they were trying to know the truth, that is what happened. And ultimately, they discovered Heathcliff dead in his bed. But there was a strange expression on his appearance. That is, he looked like being terrified or frightened by something. That was the expression of his appearance. And he died. So that very appearance of dead Heathcliff also creates a Gothic environment. It was not quite normal. It was quite abnormal. And it is associated with the ghostly or Gothic environment of this text. So if you are asked to prove Wuthering Heights as a Gothic text, you have to refer to this incident also. You will find some Gothic elements here. These elements are quite explicit. You can also interpret Heathcliff's psychological changes that may also contribute to your attempt to prove it as a Gothic text. Not only that, the novel ends with a vibe, a Gothic vibe. Mr. Lockwood has heard that while it was a stormy day, suppose the storm was going outside, thunderbolts were also going outside in such a very precarious environment, or in such a very adverse environment. The local people find Heathcliff and Catherine wandering hand in hand in the desolate heat of Wuthering Heights. That is, it was a very common story among the people, local people, that while the environment was foul, while it was a storm, or while it was thunderbolt outside, they found Heathcliff and Catherine wandering in the heat, hand in hand. That is, they found the ghosts of Catherine and Heathcliff. So this very popular story among the people also creates a Gothic environment in this text. So thus we find some Gothic elements And at the same time, this text is very closely attested with the time, because Heathcliff's dramatic change from a foundling to the master of two estates, this change actually metaphorically interprets the rapid change of the life of the Victorians of 18th century English people because of the rapid expansion of industrialization. Not only that, you can also interpret this text from feminist perspective. Just think of the miserable condition of Catherine. She was the sufferer. She suffered terribly. She had no voice. And Heathcliff was always exercising his domination upon Catherine, even little Catherine. So the female characters of this text are voiceless. They do not protest. They do not raise any resistance against the patriarchal power or dominance exercised by Heathcliff, who represents the patriarchal society, or patriarchal structure of the society. So from feminist perspective, you can interpret this text, and it will help you understand the status of women in Victorian society. And not only that, you can also evaluate this text from romantic perspective. You can call it a romantic novel because it will find here the love story. The love is not fulfilled here. That is, Heathcliff's love for Catherine is not fulfilled, or even Catherine's love for Heathcliff is not fulfilled physically. They were not married. They cannot live as husband and wife. But this canvas of the story of Wuthering Heights accommodates a love story of Heathcliff and Catherine. So I do ask you to approach this text from different perspectives. So read this text from different perspectives, from Gothic perspective, from historical perspective, from feminist perspective, from romantic perspective. You can also call it a tragic story because the love is not fulfilled. And the final consequence of Catherine, or even of Heathcliff, is very tragic. Just think of Heathcliff's end. It is not happy, actually. It's not happy at all. And if you think of Catherine's consequence or end of life, it was not also happy. And if you think of Isabel, that is Edgar Linton's sister or Heathcliff's wife, her life was also not happy. So it will feel a tragic intensity in this text. And that's why you can approach this text from tragic perspective. So you can call it a tragedy. You can also call it a comedy because at the end we find a happy conciliation or reunion between Cathy and Harriet. And we are optimistic that this couple will live in peace and happiness in future because Heathcliff is dead and the estate has gone back to its original owners. That's why it is a comedy also. It's a comedy because we find happy ending in terms of the relationship, growing relationship between Cathy and Harriet. So just think that it is a multi-dimensional text. You must not stereotype your interpretation. or you must not confine your interpretation into a certain perspective. Just keep your eyes open and keep your mind free from prejudice, from superstitions, and try to read the history of the time. Try to know the reality of the time of the production of this text. As you know, that this very text was published in 1847. At that time, Queen Victoria was on the throne, and women were coming out of home and going to schools for education. Though jobs were not very much available for them, but they received chances to be educated, to receive at least primary education. It was made compulsory by Queen Victoria. And we find a reflection of it in Emily Bronte. Emily Bronte produced this very seminal text, which is standing against the current of time. This text is still surviving. Why? Because of its strength in depicting human psychology, human behavior, human nature, human history also. So that is the manifestation of the opportunities for education of the girls in during Victorian period. So try to know that time. You have to be acquainted with the industrial development during 18th century and 19th century. So how industrialization was spreading. In 1852, there was a trade fair in England, in London. And Queen Victoria's husband was behind the success of this trade fair. And many sophisticated people participated in this trade fair. And it signified the prosperity of the British people. It also interpreted the industrial development of the British people. So just think of the time frame, the time in which industrialization was at its zenith, produced this very text. And we find the reflection of this change of time in Heathcliff's change, how dramatically he changed. So I do ask you to approach this text from different perspectives. Try to increase your ability to evaluate different incidents and events. You should have also the potential to penetrate into different characters of this text. So read the text. For example, this is the second chapter. You have to read like this. Yesterday afternoon set in misty and cold. I had half a mind to spend it by my study fire. Instead of wading through heat and mud to Wuthering Heights. On coming up from dinner, however, that is noted below, I dined between 12 and 1 o'clock. The housekeeper, a matronly lady, taken as a fixture along with the house, could not or would not comprehend my request that I might be served at 5. On mounting the stairs with this lazy intention and stepping into the room, I saw a servant girl on her knees surrounded by bush brushes and coal scuttles, and raising in the infernal dust as she extinguished the flames with the hips of cinders. This spectacle drove me back immediately. I took my hat, and after a 4 miles walk arrived at Heathcliff's garden gate, just in time to escape the first feathery flakes of a snow shower. So who is telling this story? Mr. Lockwood. Mr. Lockwood is telling this story that he has decided to meet the household master, that is Heathcliff. So he went to meet Heathcliff. So in this way, while reciting the text, you have to use dictionary. Use your dictionary. Read and think. Read and think. Read and think. Reading without thinking is not essential. It's not effective at all. If you want to make your reading effective, I do ask you to read and think. Read and think. Read and think. And then it will be able to discover something there. Otherwise not. Okay. On that bleak hilltop, the earth was hurt with a black frost, and the air made me shiver through every limb. Being unable to remove the chain, I jumped over, and running up the flat causeway, bordered with straggling gooseberry bushes, knocked vainly for admittance till my knuckles tingled, and the dogs howled. Wretched inmates, I ejaculated mentally. You deserve perpetual isolation from your species for your childish inhospitality. At least I did not keep my doors barred in the daytime. I don't care. I will get in so resolved. I grasped the latch and shook it vehemently. Vinegar-faced Joseph projected his head from a round window of the boat. What are you for? He shouted. The master's down in the farm. Go round by the end of the lake. If you went to speak to him. So just think that Joseph, the servant of the household, is using native dialect. He is not speaking standard English. He is using local dialect. So it has made the story realistic. If a servant speaks standard English, you may disbelieve. You may not believe. You may think that it is quite abnormal because a servant, a house manservant, is speaking standard English, which is suitable only for the master of the house. Just think how conscious the author is. She is very consciously choosing the language, different language for different characters in terms of their social and economic status. So this is the way you have to read. I am just telling you some techniques of reading. You have to read critically, interpretatively. Read and interpret, read and interpret, read and interpret. This is the way you may go forward while reading your text. For your sake, I'm reading a few more lines. Is there nobody inside to open the door? I hallooed responsively. There is nobody but to Mrs. and she will not open and you make your cry something still night. Why cannot you tell her whom I am? Joseph. No, never me. I will have no hand with the muttered head vanishing. The snow began to drive thickly. I seized the handle to essay another trial when a young man without coat and shouldering a pitchfork appeared in the yard behind. He hailed me to follow him. And after marching through a wash house and a paved area containing a coal shed, pump and pigeon cart, we at length arrived in the huge, warm, cheerful apartment where I was formally received, enclosed delightfully in the radiance of an immense fire, compounded of coal, heat, and wood. And near the table, laid for the plentiful evening meal, I was pleased to observe the missus, an individual whose existence I had never previously suspected. I bowed and waited, thinking she would bid me take a seat. She looked at me, leaning back in her chair, and remained motionless and mute. Roughly, I remarked, I'm afraid, Mrs. Heathcliff, the door must bear the consequence of your servants' lesser attendance. I had hard work to make them hear me. So here we find a misunderstanding. Mr. Lockwood met Cathy for the first time, and he thought that this Cathy was the wife of Heathcliff, and that's why he looked upon her as the mistress of the house, and that's why he addressed her as Mrs. Heathcliff. But actually, he was not Mrs. Heathcliff. She was not Mrs. Heathcliff, and she was the wife of Linton Heathcliff, who has already died. So the mistaken identity creates a dramatic environment in this text. It also creates mystery. It makes the readers curious. As it made curious, Mr. Lockwood was also made curious. So this is the way you have to read. Read and read and read, and ultimately you will find that this text is really interesting. So I think you have got the point. I have told you, if I summarize today's lecture, that I have told you the story of this text in brief. You have also been acquainted with some incidents and events of this text which contribute immensely to the development of plot of this text. Not only that, you are also well aware now about different approaches to this text. For example, you can judge this text from historical perspective, from psychological perspective, from feminine perspective, from moral perspective. So these are the perspectives that you can enjoy while reading this text. You can also apply these approaches for interpretation of this text. So anyway, this is all about our today's lecture. But your duty is to read the text, try to understand different corners, and if you find anything difficult, just let me know and share your ideas with me. We will discuss in detail. And another important thing that I like to mention here, that you have to take care of the fluency of your English. While speaking, you have to speak confidently. So every day you should practice speaking. Listen to the English speakers in YouTube. You will find different podcasts. So enjoy those podcasts and improve your speaking skill. Otherwise, in job market, while you will go to face interviews or while you will go to prove your worth, you may not get what you expect. So if you want to fulfill your expectation, you have to improve your fluency and you have to develop your confidence. And while talking to me, speak confidently. Just try to bring all your issues to me so that I can address effectively. Never get afraid of anybody or of anything. Just try to develop yourself. So this is all about our today's lecture. Now I like to give attendance and may I request you to write your ID numbers in your WhatsApp group. So we find here Fatimatus Johra, Orin, Shyam, then Shyam to Shyam, Sohana Rashid, Sriti, Sumaita Tahira, and Tasneem Jahan. So these 9 people I find today in my class. Am I right? Am I right,
sir.
sir? I think that I am right. So I have taken the screenshot. No problem. You need not write your ID numbers in your WhatsApp group as I have taken the screenshot. So thank you very much and all the best. And if I take one more class tomorrow or day after tomorrow, I will let you know. Thank you very much and all the best. Bye.